to bail their son out, but eventually that number was lowered to $5,000. So the two scrambled to pull the money together quickly, and Kathy even pushed back a cancer treatment to do so. And after they got the money, the police insisted on coming to the couple's house to get the money so the two could get their son out of jail faster.
The lady came to my house. I walked out to my driveway, handed her the money, and told her to drive safely.
So for these two parents, crisis averted. Except none of it was actually true. But it's also not what you think. The entire time that they were talking to their son, it wasn't really him, but rather a clone of his voice scammers had made using AI technology. And apparently it was incredibly convincing. So much so that Fred and Kathy didn't even stop to think about the possibility that it was a scam until after they had already given over the money, called their son, and discovered that he was totally fine. He'd just been at work the whole time. And the thing is, it's not just Fred and Kathy that fell for this. These kinds of scams are getting increasingly popular. Or we all know the classic grandma scam. Your family member, usually a grandparent, gets a call from someone saying you're in some kind of trouble. Maybe you need to get bailed out of jail. Whatever the case, your family member needs to wire a bunch of money to help you. And these kinds of imposter scams are incredibly common in the US. In fact, according to the Federal Trade Commission in 2022, imposter scams were actually the most frequent kind of fraud reported and accounted for the second highest losses among those targeted, totaling $2.6 billion. And in total, more than 2.3 million people reported some kind of fraud to the FTC. And of the over 1.4 million of those reports that listed the contact method for the scam, 1 in 5 said that they had received a phone call, making it the most common method after texting. Now, notably here, the data doesn't show what percentage of those scam calls came from scammers using AI voice deepfakes. But if anything, what we're talking about today is really the evolution of this scam. And understand, this isn't like a few personal anecdotes that's meant to scare like the old people that watch Fox News. This is something that is actually happening and with increasing frequency. In fact, this specific tactic has become so commonly used that the FTC recently issued a consumer alert about them, with them explaining how insanely easy it is for a scammer to use AI to clone voices in writing. All he needs is a short audio clip of your family member's voice, which you could get from content posted online and a voice cloning program. And adding when the scammer calls you, he'll sound just like your loved one. And even if you're like, hey, I'm not on social media, I'm not posting myself like that. Experts also say that scammers record people's voices through things like calling people with fake surveys or other spam calls. And y'all, I gotta say, as someone that's messed with some of the AI voice cloning stuff, like, it's incredibly simple and you do not need that much audio. And as always with this, 1, the tech where it is right now is the worst it'll ever be again. And 2, as time goes on, there are more and more options for people to use every day. With places like Gizmodo also explaining that the cross-section of other AIs makes this even more dangerous, saying chatbots like ChatGPT are starting to generate realistic scripts with adaptive real-time responses. By combining these technologies with voice generation, a deepfake goes from being a static recording to a live, lifelike avatar that can convincingly have a phone conversation. And this whole situation goes beyond grandma scams. Right? There have actually been multiple instances of criminals using this technology to scam massive companies out of huge amounts of money. I mean, for example, a few years ago, there was this one insane case where the CEO of a UK-based energy company thought that he was speaking on the phone with the head of his firm's parent company, with the second CEO asking the first one to transfer nearly $250,000. They obey, thinking, hey, that's what the boss wants. But turns out, AI voice deepfake the whole time. And even that's not as crazy as this other story out of Hong Kong, because there, scammers cloned the voice of a company's director. They then called a banker who he had spoken to before, and then successfully convinced him that the firm was making an acquisition and needed around $35 million in bank transfers. And at this point, you might be wondering, well, what's being done to prevent this? Well, the answer is not a whole lot. I know, shocking given some of our leaders in Congress.
Does TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network?
Right, this is a fast-growing industry. The laws are so far behind, meaning that there are very few legal precedents for the judicial system to compel the firms that make AI voice cloning to actually fucking do anything. Also, with the way things are, like, these crimes can be committed from anywhere to anywhere. And so as a result, it's extremely difficult for the authorities to trace these calls, track them down, and get the funds they stole back. And also, because it's a global problem, you have these overlapping jurisdictions, and I really don't see this getting handled anytime soon. Now, with all this, the good news is there are a few steps that you can take to protect yourself. 1, never post yourself on the internet and never answer a phone ever. Or as the FTC recommends, don't trust the voice. Call the person who supposedly contacted you and verify the story. Use a phone number you know is theirs. If you can't reach your loved one, try to get in touch with them through another family member or their friends. In adding, scammers ask you to pay or send money in ways that make it hard to get your money back. If the caller says to wire money, send cryptocurrency, or buy gift cards and give them the card numbers and pins, those could be signs of a scam. Other experts also recommending for you to be mindful of unexpected calls, and they're also recommending you don't rely on caller ID because those can also be faked. But ultimately with this story, of course, I'd love to know your opinion, but the specific question I want to ask is, have you or anyone you know been targeted by something like this? And if so, if you're so inclined, please share. And then, people have been commenting on a lot of my shirts and how they like them, and so I'll tell you, the True Classic. So thank you to True Classic for helping me look my Philly D best, and doing so in these comfortable, buttery soft fabrics. Also, thanks for sponsoring today's PDS. You know, True Classic is the premium men's brand for your everyday essentials like t-shirts, long sleeves, hoodies, activewear, and more. You know, I like the simplicity of their pre-assembled outfits to make pairing and layering easier than ever. I mean, it's just one less thing to worry about on the daily. And they offer 3-packs, 6-packs, and even 9-packs with tons of color combinations to choose from. And I like that True Classic fits you in all the right places. Tighter fit in the arms and chest, tapered, looser fit in the midsection. And the fabric is as high quality as it gets. No matter how many times you wash it, they won't shrink or shred. And if you're not used to buying clothes online, True Classic has their True Fit custom sizing tool to help figure out the right size for you using a sliding scale to match your fit to your unique body proportions. So if you beautiful bastards are looking for more affordable quality clothing that lasts, go to trueclassictees.com/Phil and use my promo code Phil25 and you'll get 25% off your order plus free shipping. True Classic. Anything but basic. And then the government has abandoned these black communities, leaving the people of St. James, the Baptist parish, to get cancer and die for years and years. And this goes beyond just negligence. The Louisiana state government has actually made the problem worse. I mean, today, the community of St. James has gotten to the point that if you do not have cancer yourself, you know at least 2 people who do. The risk of cancer in the area is reportedly 7 times higher than the national average. And less than 10 years ago, it was 50 times higher. All right, so let's break this down. St. James Parish is within Louisiana's infamous Cancer Alley. It's an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And it's called Cancer Alley because it's home to around a quarter of the petrochemical plants in the United States, as well as countless other pipelines, refineries, and gas and oil operations. And local officials welcomed these facilities for decades, even making it easier for them to set up shop in the parish's 4th and 5th districts in 2014, when they passed the St. James Parish Land Use Plan, rezoning those districts as both residential and future industrial. But until 2015, the connection between the factories and the cancer rates was mostly speculative. But then the EPA updated the National Air Toxics Map that December, with a map identifying one of the communities within the St. James Parish, a town called Reserve, as the place with the highest cancer risk in the country. And this because of their proximity to the Denka plant, the only producer of neoprene in the United States. And a key component of developing neoprene is chloroprene, which the EPA labeled as a likely carcinogen back in 2010. And so the December 2015 EPA report resulted in the Denka plant being considered responsible for the greatest risk of cancer of any manufacturing facility in the U.S. And to the people of Reserve, this revelation was made much, much worse because the Denka plant, it's only 450 feet away from their elementary school. Okay, so why don't they just move the school? Right, that's obviously the easiest solution to the problem. Well, as ridiculous as that sounds, the Louisiana Department of Health actually had that conversation in 2016 and determined that moving the school to a different part of the community wouldn't even lower the risk of cancer for the kids. But with this, you had people going, hey, at least Denka got called out about their emissions. How'd they respond? Well, in January of 2017, they signed an agreement with the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality to voluntarily reduce their emissions, which they say has cost them a total of nearly $18 million. But a key thing to note is that between 2017 and 2018, they also reportedly spent $350,000 lobbying the Trump administration to repeal chloropene's classification as a likely carcinogen. And then years later, the problem never got better because in 2020, the EPA reported spikes of chloroprene near the school around 8,300% higher than the acceptable level of long-term exposure. And their Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights sent a letter to the state officials saying that black communities were being disproportionately affected by air pollutants, all because of the failure of the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality and the Louisiana Department of Health to act with any sort of necessary gravity. But also you had some saying the EPA was just passing the buck onto the state, with one former EPA official saying their accusations are, quote, somewhat ridiculous because Louisiana is running the program that EPA designed, delegated to them, and partially funds. And he went on to add, the EPA is deflecting fire and scapegoating the state. But despite the accusations, the EPA stuck to their guns, sending another letter last October saying the same thing, also accusing the state of dismissing residents' concerns, underselling the actual dangers of chloroprene, misrepresenting air monitoring data, and even conducting flawed studies. But this year, the federal government seemingly decided enough was enough, and the Justice Department sued Denka demanding they lower their emissions. However, for the people of St. James, it's too little too late, with one state official saying the EPA could have immediately shut the factory down, but they didn't do that. It's unconscionable that it has taken this long. When the EPA suspected that this was a carcinogen, they should have acted with urgency. They just issued an order that could have and should have been issued years ago. One resident of the Reserve adding, why are they allowed to continue to poison us? They need to stop until they can prove they are operating safely. Right now, you have the federal government conducting an investigation into whether the permits granted in Cancer Alley by state officials have violated the rights of black residents. In the meantime, several organizations founded by black women from the area have launched a lawsuit against local government officials for continuing to allow the construction of these plants in these predominantly black neighborhoods, reportedly claiming that these approvals have a direct connection to the lingering remains of slavery and segregation in the area. And they're calling for a complete moratorium of new plant construction in the districts, and arguing that the local government has, quote, intentionally chosen to locate over a dozen enormous industrial facilities in the majority black 4th and 5th districts of the parish, while explicitly sparing white residents from the risk of environmental harm. And their suit going on to say that despite the cries for relief from the residents, every single request from factories to set up shop in the primarily black districts of the parish have been approved, saying of the 11 factories in St. James that report their levels of air toxicity to the EPA, 9 of them are in districts 4 and 5. And they're pointing specifically to the 2014 land use plan that zoned their districts for this type of industrial development without any input from the community. But ultimately, that's where we are. Understand this is still a developing situation. We need to see what happens with the investigation into Louisiana state officials. But for now, whether it be this or any of the 3 stories today, let me know your thoughts in those comments down below. Thanks as as always, for being a part of my daily dives in the news. We got a brand new week of shows for you, starting with the Monday Philip DeFranco show tomorrow. So see you back here tomorrow, because my name's Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love yo faces, and I'll see you